let us move ahead, shall we?
Shall we?
Jeff has a feature that I always look forward to Jeff's features because he decides what they're going to be.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to do with that. So this week it's going to be Cuban cars. We probably should rename that Cuban Cars and Cigars.
You could name it whatever you want.
Okay, thank you.
But here we go.
All right.
One of the first things you notice as you enter Havana is the colorful vintage cars that line the streets. The classic car is much of Cuban icon, as Don says, as cigars. But why does Cuba have so many old cars? Cuba has never had a car manufacturing industry, so they relied solely on automotive imports to populate the island's roads. During the Cuban-Spanish War, Conrad, the first ever import to Cuba was a La Parisienne from a little-known French manufacturer in 1898.
Oh, wow.
1919, Cuba was the largest Latin American importer of U.S. cars and parts and was among the countries with the highest number of vehicles per capita in the world. The classic Model T was the ubiquitous on Cuban streets, fondly referred to as a Fantingo, which means, Conrad, clunker or jalopy. Even now, the Cuban cars that you see on the road, they still call them Fantingos. During the first half of the 20th century, Cuba was used as a test track for many of the American car manufacturers, meaning that the cars were often available in Cuba before being sold in the United States.
I did not know that.
Yes. Ford, Chevrolet, Cadillac, and Chrysler shipped their cars down to the Miami ports, or the closest one down there, and then they would arrive in Havana a few days later. So by 1956, there were 140,000 cars in Cuba, and 90,000 of those were on the streets. 1959 was the beginning of the Cold War, so Fidel Castro put an embargo on the U.S. and foreign imports. So no more parts, no more cars. Cuban owners had to make a choice to either let their cars rust in the garage or use what parts they had readily available, which was often seen today. Cuban locals were forced to make repairs and restorations using what, David? Russian and Chinese vehicles, primarily the plethora of Ladas, Volgas, and Greelys were still readily available. Now, you put ointment on a Greeley, it'll go away. You can see the range of patched-up cars on display through the country, often painted in vivid colors and to hide the panel work and all the bondo and things like that. So in 2016, Fidel Castro's brother, Raul, kind of relaxed a little bit of the permissions to come into Cuba, which really weren't that great. Still regulated. For instance, if a car cost $29,000 here in the U.S., it was more like $260,000 in Cuba.
Holy Toledo!
So there were sort of restrictions on that as well.
Whew.
So many of the cars happily drive around. They take tours. You can actually rent one and take a tour. They encourage you to do that, to either rent one or have one as like a taxi, because you can go through all the tobacco growing regions of Pinar del Rio, the world famous Bolivar Royal Corona cigar, which David knows about. So there's a lot of vintage cars in Cuba. Today there's still embargoes. The cars are still cool down there. And if you're watching it on video, there's a lot of neat stuff going on down there.
Do they have the Swisher Sweet Tour?
No Swisher Sweet Tour.
No, but you can drive a 57 Chevy powered by a Volga 4-cylinder turbo diesel.
Yeah, but not a Greeley, because you put ointment on a Greeley. So we're just going to let this roll here. And I've got one special coming up that I think is on here that Mike and I talked about. And there it is. There's the man right there.
There's the beauty.
Is that Mars?
That's Mars in Cuba.
Wait, that's Mars in there.
2018, Mr. Mars was in Cuba.
Well, what was he dealing over there?
Cars, parts.
Really? I mean, I did not know. Did I know?
Yeah, I remember him going
to Cuba. Who paid for that trip? He didn't.
NADA.
Really?
No, I have no idea. But when we talked, I sent Mike some information. He goes, I've got a picture. I said, let's do it.
He went on the Jerry Garcia tour. He's trucking.
So thank you, Michael. I appreciate your help in that. We love you, buddy.
Oh my God, that's classic.
So
literally,
you can still find the old 40s, 50s, 30s, all that down there.
A few years ago,
find any new ones.
A few years ago, went to San Francisco and did a microbus love bus tour.
Oh yeah.
And so the guy had an old Volkswagen hippie bus from back in the day.
That's normal in San Francisco.
And took you through, Haight-Ashbury, all the sites, and it was very good, actually. And it was really kind of cool to be in the old hippie bus. And what a great idea. Can you get tickets to go? I guess you can get tickets to go to Havana.
You have to go through the State Department, and you cannot go there just to go.
It's not as open as it used to be.
You have to have a purpose, a reason. There has to be something, a benefit to do that, to be down there. And then you can't overstay because you'll be in jail and all that stuff. Not like here, but you have to go through the State Department and get approvals and all that. You got to have your passports and all that, shots and all that good stuff.
Think of how much money Cuba would make on the tourism industry. Why don't they open it?
Well, they did that little bit that they were open when Mars went.
Yeah.
That was a real boon to Cuba.
It has been relaxed a little bit, but so far as the car industry down there, those cars will still be there in another 50 years.
Like not letting us go down there. It's like, what's the purpose now? Back in the day, the Cold War and all that stuff, I got it. But you can go to communist countries. It's not like it's against the law.
Well, you can go to China and
Also
Russia
Vietnam.
and all that stuff. Just behave yourself.
Well, that's a given,
Conrad.
Which is why I don't go, because I don't know how to behave myself. Clearly,
For sure.
What?
the End Time Car Talk Show is available 24/7 through the iHeart Radio app. Just look for it, End Time Car Talk. We also